Hi, so Steve Proctor,
Yes, again.
it says
That-
here, Balearic and acid house pioneer,
Uh-huh.
DJ and remixer.
Uh-huh.
Is that it?
Well, not really. There's
I
a bit
didn't
more
think
to
so.
it than that, I think. And as you quite rightly pointed out when we first spoke, I mean, there's a lot more to it. That was the sort of then. That was the sort of now, you know. And but there's a big story about how I got there.
Well, that's why we're here.
Exactly.
That's why we're here. So, obviously, go back to the basics really, and back to the beginning. What kicked off your interest in music?
What kicked off my interest in music? Well, to be honest with you, I got into music because my father was really into music.
Okay.
And I last saw my father. I came back to live in England in 1971. And I bought, the first record I ever bought was actually an album called Cosmos Factory by Creedence Clearwater Revival.
Oh, I like them, yeah.
And I bought that album because it was the album that my dad was playing when I left him for the last time, as it were. We don't want to go into the reasons why.
No.
But
he had good taste, didn't he? Like in Creedence.
well, yeah. I mean, he was a great musician. He was a phenomenal musician,
Right.
and obviously, I mean, I was always around. Well, the time I was with him, he was always, he could play guitar, he could play piano. He was always playing records. And what was quite interesting was that I became even more aware of that when I ended up living with my grandparents in Liverpool, because I inherited my dad's record collection that he'd left when he'd emigrated to Canada, when we'd emigrated to Canada in the 60s. So I inherited a set of records. But I'd also, by that time, I was also buying my own records.
What was the first one that you bought?
The first one was Cosmos Factory, but the first single I ever bought was Chicory Tips out of my father.
Brilliant, I love it, yeah.
Which, at the time, I didn't realise was written by Giorgio Moroder.
Was it?
Yeah.
When he was a young man?
Oh, yes.
Wow, I didn't know
And
that.
it was the first British number one to, I think British number one to feature a Moog synthesizer.
Yeah.
People mention Popcorn by Hot Butter, but I don't think that was ever number one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was just a combination of that synth sound. I mean, from the moment I heard that synth, I was hooked on synths.
Wow.
That's been probably one of my most prevalent guiding features.
Inspirational, yeah.
Well, is pop music, great song, but also that unique sound. It was a really mind-blowing sound, even for me, as I think I was 12 years old.
Yeah, so you're the same age as me.
Yeah,
Born
60.
in 60.
Yeah.
Wow.
I was born in 59, but yeah.
Yeah, similar age.
But and I quickly went on. I bought, I was buying David Bowie records. I had copies of Space Oddity on Philips. I think it was Philips, yeah, and things like that. Really into Slade and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, as I say, I ended up living with my grandparents. By 72, I was living with my grandparents. So I was buying all these pop records, but I'd inherited basically a copy of the Beatles had Sgt. Pepper's, Rubber Soul, Help, Donovan albums, a load of those Top of the Pops albums, and singles, Avenue singles on a label called Avenue. And that was, so basically I found myself immersed in music very, very quickly. I was living with my grandparents. I was what they referred to at the time as maladjusted. I'd had a really screwed up childhood. And my escape was music, basically.
Yeah, brilliant.
So, but one of the other things I'd inherited was a Grundig a reel-to-reel tape recorder that had been my dad's, with one reel of tape and a little mono microphone. So on a Thursday, I would literally sit in the living room or in the family room, holding the microphone to the TV and record Top of the Pops.
Wow.
And I'd have that on the reel-to-reel until the top 20 came on Sunday.
Yeah.
And I had a little transistor radio and stand the microphone in front of it, and I'd literally be on the pause button to stop. I can't remember the guy's name. Alan Freeman. Freeman is like Fluff, yeah. And the side of what was the music? The side of the swinging cymbal was the music.
Okay. That's fair.
And then I'd record that, and I'd have that until the Thursday. And I just kept using that reel tape over and over again.
Wow.
And then started buying albums and singles, and very quickly got to a point where I'd say to my grandparents and any family member, I just want money for my birthday or for Christmas, and I'd buy records.
Good pastime, isn't it?
Well, it was my escape.
Release,
It was
yeah.
really my escape, but
Yeah.
it was also, it was something that felt just so natural to me, you know. I mean, seeing Bowie on Top of the Pops in '72 just changed my. And Roxy Music before that, funny enough, Virginia Plain was just before Starman, and it was a combination of being so excited about these people with style and different. I felt like an outsider. I was pretty much an outsider because I'd moved around a lot as a kid, and even in Liverpool, I still had a Canadian accent at the time, and I'd already been to school and crew, and I'd been in 3 foster homes and children's home before I was ended up. So I was always,
Sometimes.
I was always an outsider, as it were. And you know, music. I immersed myself in music, and it probably saved my life. I'll be honest with you.
I can see later on in your story how some of those influences there, David Bowie and Roxy, become pivotal later on as well. So
Absolutely.
It's amazing.
Well, I mean, and to be honest with you, I mean, it's one of those things that at the time you don't think, you know, you don't buy a record thinking, oh, I'm going to use this in 5 years' time or 10 years' time or whatever. You know, you never ever, if you're passionate, if you feel something within your soul, it's, you know, there's no rhyme or reason for it. It just happens. You just do it. You know. But yeah, so I found myself very quickly to the point where I was doing a paper round 6 days a week, 7 days a week sometimes. And I used to take my wages in the newsagents at the time. They used to have what they called Pop-X records, which was basically, as they took them out of the jukeboxes, they'd put them in the newsagents, and you could get them for like 20p each or something like that.
With the holes missing.
With the hole, because they went on the jukebox. And
Yeah.
they looked like American imports.
Yeah.
But so basically, I very quickly got to a point where I'd identify all the records that I really wanted. So when they came out of the charts, I literally would spend my entire wages on ex-jukebox records. So I collected I acquired a lot of singles very, very quickly, and very, very weird ones as well, you know.
What was the weirdest one?
At the time?
Yeah.
I tell you what I really like, Desiderata by Les Crane.
I remember that, yeah.
Which is it's the beautiful old poem put to music. I was buying every Slade record that came out, every Sweet record came out, every T-Rex, Bob Bolan record that came out, every Bowie record that came out, every, you know, I mean, some of those I'd buy full price. Every Bowie, you know, everything like that, all the glam stuff. But I got into rock and roll for a little bit. I got into Northern Soul for a little bit. I used to go to all the school discos, and one of the things again that I found really enjoyable was dancing. And it was a time, you know, in '73, '74. All the lads stood around and looked hard in their gang and eyed up the other gang. And I'd be dancing with the girls, you know what I mean? So I was doing the bump, I was doing the bus stop, I was doing the hustle, you know, and I loved it, you know. And I'd buy the records that went with those, and I'd have them at home. So my record collection, even then, was Bowie to Bohannon, you know, which is interesting because later on Bowie becomes this mad soul funk freak, you know.
Yeah, then White Duke.
Yeah.
Excellent. So you were then part of the legendary Eric's in Liverpool, 76 to 80, plus other Liverpool indie clubs.
Right, okay, well, it's a huge honour to be considered to be part of Eric's.
Yeah.
I never really
Very
considered...
lucky.
Well, I never considered myself to be part of it, but with retrospect, like everything with me, I was an early adopter, shall we say. But I mean, basically, I got into... One of the things that... I went to school with Ian Brodie.
Wow.
He was in my class at school.
Yeah.
And he was a bit of an outsider as well, because he's into music. So quite regularly we would I would go home with him, and he'd be, you know, in his bedroom with his Fender Strat, you know, or Telecaster, I can't remember, Strat, and he could play every guitar lick you could ever imagine, and I used to be fascinated by it. And you know, my dad used to be able to do that as well. So I sort of used to hang around with Ian a lot. And I was doing a lot of sport, and I was very, very physically fit. And he formed a band, or he got involved with a band, when he started hanging around Matthew Street, right? So we'd hang around Matthew Street and Twackies. Jane Casey was already a massive icon for me when she was in Cut Above the Rest. Yeah. And I used to I would leave school and I wouldn't tell her. I'd say to the lads, oh, I'm just going to go to the precinct to Jonathan Silver's to have a look at the clothes. Because I was a big clothes freak as well. Yeah. I mean, I was always at the height of fashion. You know, school clothes, my own clothing. I was buying my own clothes by the time I was 14. Shoes, whatever, you know, I had my hair cut however I wanted. I set my own style basically. So I used to say, I'm going to go to Jonathan Silver's to check out what's in the window, and I'd slide past Cuss Above the Rest on the other side of the piece, just so I could see what's Jane wearing today. What's Jane today? So she was my first icon. You know, what I mean, it really was. I've told her this. She knows this, but I really, you know, and then obviously I used to see Pete Burns in there as well, and I used to think, wow, you know, these guys are doing it, you know, and I love that. So, but I used to hang around with Ian as well. So when he got involved with a band called the O'Boogie Brothers, which was Ian, Nathan McGough, Knopoff, Dave Kay, guy called Neil who played keyboards, I think. I hated him because I ended up roadieing for them basically because I couldn't play, and doing their sound, which basically meant a Carlsberg 100 watt PA top with like me fiddling with the sound, put a little echo on occasionally and all that. But he had a Hammond and a Fender Rhodes, and gee, I hated him because I had to hump them out. But through being involved with that, they were playing various parties. That's how I got to know the people from Deaf School.
Wow.
And because they used to play together quite a lot. I mean, they're just phenomenal musicians, the whole lot of them, and that real art school rock thing before punk, you know what I mean? It was different. I mean, everybody looked different, everybody dressed, and it was me to a T. Different music, great songs, great musicians, great style, great fashion, out there, individuals, everything that was me that I didn't even know was me at the time. And through that, so they started, when Deaf School started playing at Eric's, I mean, most memorably, I remember Eric's Deaf School Eric's on Christmas Eve 1976. That was the one that really stands out for me. I think I'd been to Eric's a couple of times before, because Roger was really cool. Roger Eagle, yeah.
Club owner.
But I was doing my A-levels. I was in the lower sixth, but I was basically at that time you had to have humpers. Every promoter, every club had to have humpers. So I would go down and hump gear in.
Okay. And
in return for which I'd get in for free, get a couple of pints, you know. But my most memorable gig was the Deaf School gig, Christmas Eve 1976. That was when I knew I pumped gear in. I remember being at the very front of the stage, loved the gig, and walked home on Christmas Day morning by myself. My grandparents had gone to stay with my aunt for Christmas, and I remember having tomato soup and toast for Christmas dinner, watching Top of the Pops, having just seen the most amazing gig.
Doesn't get any better than that.
And so it went from there. So basically, I got to the point where I was regularly humping gear at Eric's. I forgot most of the bands. I know I did the Jam. I know I did the Stranglers. I know I did. I can't remember who else I did.
When you see these posters people put on the Eric's page and others, you see these posters, these gig flyers.
Yes.
At the time, like the quality bands each
know,
week, you know, amazing. I know.
And what's really interesting is that years later, that really sort of permeated. Roger was probably between Roger and Norman, probably the most two influential early influences in my life.
Norman was the DJ.
Sorry, Norman was the DJ, yeah. Because it was the first club where a DJ was playing everything from reggae, heavy dub reggae, to Bowie, to punk.
Totally different, wasn't it?
To blues, you know. Roger's own record collection in his jukebox, you know, it was heaven for me, and it was a magical time. And yeah, that was certainly. You couldn't have asked for a better start as far as influences are concerned.
Fantastic. And you then established yourself on the new romantic and futuristic scene.
Futurist. Sorry.
Futurist
yeah,
scene. Do apologise. So you established yourself on the new romantic futurist scene.
Yeah.
It's one of the most successful and high-profile DJs in the country. That was an incredible achievement. How did you do that?
Well, again, that's one of those things that happened just through pure fluke. I mean, when you go back to talking about before about buying records and being involved with things, I never regard myself as being a trendsetter, but I always regard myself as sort of being not up front but in front. Do you know what I mean? And
trendsetter.
The new romantic, the futurist thing. I mean, it started off as a Roxy Bowie thing, really. And by that time, you know, I already had, you know, every Bowie, Roxy Music, right, Iggy Pop, you know, a lot of new wave stuff, you know. But I was also buying Kraftwerk and Ultravox and stuff like that as well. Electronic music, a lot of electronic music because of my love for synthesizers. But I was also going to a club called Hollywood's, which was a proper disco. And that, the main DJ there was a guy called Mike Davidson, who became my next influence, as it were. Or became an influence for me, because basically he was a personality DJ. You know, his knowledge about soul and funk and disco music was phenomenal, and his charm and his character and his personality was unbelievable. He's a real personality, real force of nature, and he was a real hustler. He was where I'd learned about hustling. I didn't realize at the time, but you know, he knew every promotions person in London. You know, if there was going to be, you know, a band was going to be in his club in Liverpool, he'd have them in the club. You know, and I'd meeting all these bands, and I've seen him. And basically, he announced he was going to do this Roxy Bowie night. Now, I'd already been attending a few here, there, and everywhere, bits and pieces, but nothing really good. And he said, I want to do this Roxy Bowie night. And I said, well, you know, have you got the music? And he said, well, no. He said, it's
a good start, isn't it?
He said, you know, will you help me out? So basically, I agreed to lend him all my records and advise him about which ones to play. And in return for which, he used to let me play at the very beginning of the night when there was nobody in the club, basically. But it meant that I was able to learn how to use the equipment. At the time, it was this Citronic Hawaii with Garrod SP25 Mark IV disco driver decks, and you know, I remember it really well. And you know, it was belt-driven decks, no vari-speed, nothing like that. But you still had to learn how to cue the records up. You had to learn when to fade out and crossfade and program and mix and all the rest of it. And not mix beat match, but mix as in blend records together. And in return for which he introduced me to people from Polydor and from RCA and all the big people. And it got to a point where basically after a few of them, it was once a month, but after a few of them, a mate of mine called me, and I was working at Penny Lane Records at the time. So obviously getting a lot more music in as well. And this guy said, have you seen this, a new club called Cagney's has opened up, and they're advertising a Roxy Bowie night. And I said, oh, let's go along. And I actually said to him, let's go along, and if the DJ's shit, I'm going to ask for his job. Which is probably one of the most arrogant things I've ever done. And I didn't mean it disrespectfully, but it was just like, you know, I reckon I can have a go.
It's your job, yeah.
So we went along, and it wasn't very busy, and the DJ was just sitting down, going through the motions. And I've always been a stickler for integrity and for doing things properly. And I literally walked up to him and I said, look, mate, I said, you know, I'm loving the music, but you're not really into this, are you? He said, no, mate, I'm not. He said, I'm just helping my friends out who own the place until they can find a DJ that wants to do this. And I said, well, whose records are they? He said, well, it's the owner's records. He said, he's really into it. That's why they're doing the night. But he's not a DJ and he's got to manage the place. So I said, well, look, you know, I'm really interested in doing it. Do you mind if I ask for your job? He said, no, we've been waiting for somebody like you to come along.
Wow.
So he said, there's guys over there, Dave. So I went over to the guy. I said, look, you know, my name's Steve Proctor. I said, I've never been a DJ in my life, but I lend all my records to Mike Davidson. As soon as I said Mike Davidson at Hollywood's, he was like, whoa, you know what I mean? Wow, okay. I said, you know, but I'm interested. He said, well, come next week for an audition. Come at 8:30 for an audition. So I said, okay. Went back to my mate and said, oh, I've got an audition next week, you know. And then about 20 minutes later, this owner, Dave, came up and said, look, my mate's a bit bored. Do you want to have a go now? And there wasn't many people in there anyway, to be honest with you. And I said, what, with these records? He said, yeah. He said, they're my records. He said, you know, help yourself, you know. So I went on, played for half an hour. I can't remember what I played, what order I played in or whatever like that. He had some good records, I've got to be honest with you. The guy came back, the other DJ came back about half an hour later. He said, oh, yeah, my mate wants to have a word with you. So I thought, oh, here we go. He's going to say, yeah, don't bother next week, mate. You know, But I went up to the guy. He said, yeah, I like what you did there. He said, have you got all the records? And I said, yeah. He said, yeah, start next week.
Great.
So it's like, oh, okay. He said, yeah, it's 9 till 2, £7 a night.
You're kidding me.
No, that was what it was. That was.
There was something about the flyers before from Eric's. It just shocks me, like some of the
prices.
Bands are still massive today, like the Pound,
Yeah, no, exactly.
150.
Well, that's what's funny enough. I mean, that's what's happened with me as well. But yeah, so again, I mean, it was a case of like I started, and to be honest with you, I gave myself 6 months. I thought, I'll have a little crack here, and then it'll fall apart. But I thought, while I'm here, I'm going to give it a bloody good go. I'd never set out to be a DJ. I never set out to be in the music business, but I immediately applied everything I'd learned and what I'd observed. So, Mike had already introduced me to people from Polydor and from, so I immediately adopted what he used to do. So I'd do record promotion nights and I'd do, band promotion nights and things like that. So very, very quickly the word went round, because like any scene, it was word of mouth, You can advertise all you want, but it's word of mouth at the end of the day. And the word went round that there was a club called Cagney's where a DJ was one of us. You know what I mean? Because I was once described as the Steve Strange and the Rusty Egan of Liverpool, because I was playing the music that Rusty was playing, but I was dressed like Steve Strange. And my attitude was to lead from the front, basically, and to show people that they could be comfortable and they could be safe because they could trust me. Because there was nothing worse than going into a club and seeing some guy that looked like he'd just come off the line of Fords, just going through the motions sort of thing, you know what I mean? I wanted to share my passion with people who shared that passion.
What year was this, roughly?
79, 80.
Right.
70.
The start of the Year Romantics.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
The bouffants and...
Yeah, well, and the
Philly
Philly shirts and all the rest of it. And I'm proud to say that I was there at the very, very beginning, And through my connections in London already, I went to the Blitz a few times, so I met Steve Strange, I met the guys from Spandau Ballet before they had the record deal.
Wow.
And the word went round, because people talk, And it was such a, it was like punk. It was like punk. It was like but obviously punk was a lot more explosive because of the bands there, but it felt to me like that because everybody was passionate. Everybody lived it,
Yeah. But it was a massive explosion, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Massive explosion. You don't see that today.
Well, you don't. I mean, obviously, times have changed, and I tried my best to resist being a curmudgeon-y old bugger saying, "Oh, my day." I to be honest with you, I was quite lucky because obviously I was part of punk. I came of age during the glam era, really.
Only about 13 then, though, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I was. But so the opportunity. It was interesting because I was using all the records I'd bought in the glam era as a springboard for me to become what later became a new romantic future. It was a Roxy Bowie night, right? Yeah. But that incorporated everything else that went along with it. And because of my love of electronics, very, very quickly was incorporating Depeche Mode, Kraftwerk, even bands like Can, And I've got, I'll be honest with you, I mean, I was a little bit influenced by what Rusty Egan was doing, but I was also because I was working at Penny Lane Records, every record that came in, I'd go, well, that's got a synthesizer on it, let's have a listen, you know what I mean? So I was playing mad stuff, Moody Blues, Gemini Dream, and Justin Hayward, crazy stuff as well, mixed in with some really hardcore, Throbbing Gristle United and stuff like that, which I'd picked up. I very quickly put my own stamp on it because I realised as a DJ that's what you had to do to stand out. And that's what I'd learned from Norman Killen at Eric's. But also what I'd learned from him is the courage of your own convictions, and to be able to create an identity as being a DJ to play stuff that nobody else plays. And that was what I later on learned on. That's what the Northern Soul scene was based on, and the jazz funk scene was based on, was people having records that nobody else had. I had a reel in because I was managing a record shop, but I was also had a reel in to people in London. So, I was getting sent copies, People say, there's 5 copies in the country of this, it's a brand new single from Duran Duran. Have you ever heard of them? Will you play this sort of thing? And I got a reputation as being a DJ that would take those, So I very quickly got to a point where I was having PA band, people would bring me up and say, I've got this new band called ABC, will you take them for a PA? Yeah, of course I will, And then, off they went, and Bill Nelson and, Pete Shelley. Pete Shelley, my first ever promotion was Pete Shelley at Cagney's,
At the Homo Sapien.
Homo Sapien, yeah.
Album,
it was that single. I mean, that was massive for me, that single,
Oh,
And what I was very good at doing, even though I didn't realise I was doing it, was basically I would communicate that passion that enjoyment or appreciation of it. So I'd find out who the record company was or who the manager was, or even the artist sometimes. And I'd say, I'm playing your record and it's fucking great. You know, have you got anything else?
And it's going down well, and you're building that relationship.
And that was basically how I got started. And so as I said, the 6 months passed, and they said, look, you're so successful. I mean, it literally took a club that had maybe 30 people in it to absolute capacity. Then they moved to this. They opened a Sunday as well. So I very quickly had the two biggest nights in Liverpool. You know, and then I got to the point where, you know, I was friendly with the guys from Ultravox, friendly with the guys from Japan, Duran, Spandau Ballet. So whenever they came to Liverpool, I'd throw a party for them.
Yeah,
you know.
fantastic.
And you know, and they'd come to my club because it was me. Oh, for you, Steve? Yeah, we'll come down. We'll know we'll be looked after. We know it's good people. We'll know it's the right situation. So I was starting. My reputation was part of the reason why I was attracting people. You know,
differentiating.
Well, yeah, because you know, people knew
people
because people respected the fact that I was there from the very beginning. People respected the fact that I was genuine about what I was doing. There was nothing forced and nothing false. I can't do that. I've never been able to do that. I'd rather walk away from a situation than fake it. You know, the one thing I'm proud of is I've maintained my own integrity and dignity all the way through.
Brilliant. So you have this reputation for breaking a number of bands, went on to become 80s superstars and still are.
Yes, yeah. Well, they're having their second wind.
Absolutely, yeah. Come back on the circuit and all the revival festivals, etc. What was New Order all about? Because I know you were heavily involved there.
Well, that was a different thing, wasn't it? I mean, obviously, I was playing their records. You know, obviously, it was devastating when Ian Curtis died, and obviously, I was already playing, you know, Joy Division records. But when I think it was Everything's Gone Green, I think it was the first single. I can't remember. Temptation, Everything's Gone Green. Ceremony. My apologies. Ceremony. Yeah, with the bronze sleeve, with the embossed. Yeah, typical Peter Saville extravagance. Ceremony, of course it was. So I was playing that immediately. But when Everything's Gone Green came along, and they all of a sudden they'd taken that leap into electronics. For me, that was like, wow, this is, you know, the best of everything, you know. So I was always playing their records. I mean, it came along a bit, but before that, I promoted Pete Shelley. I'd basically been offered Pete Shelley for a gig on the back of me telling everybody how involved with him, how big Homo sapien was. And then I was friendly with Flock of Seagulls as well. So I started. I promoted their gig at Pickwick's, and then, you know, bits and pieces, and it sort of went on from there. And then I had ABC do a PA, and then another PA for me, and then Bill Nelson did a PA, and then Heaven 17 did a PA for me at the Executive Club for Penthouse and Pavement. Wow. So I had this reputation of being able to work with acts, not so much promoting as such, but promoting in one way or another. Even though the Pickwick's gig with Flock of Seagulls was a sellout, and the Pete Shelley gig was a sellout, so I'd cut my teeth really early on that sort of thing. But it was when I went to the States that things really kicked off. Can I tell you a quick story about how I got involved with the State first?
Absolutely. What happened there?
Basically, again, it was one of those situations where Bernie. I got a phone call one day from Bernie Starr, and I knew Bernie from Kirkland's, because we used to go to Kirkland's in 75, 76. The Baltimore Rooms was the place, and that was again where I was there with, you know, the guys from Deaf School, you know, Nathan McGough, Ian Brody. You know, we'd hang around there. So I knew Bernie. Bernie was always super cool. So I was really excited one day, well, quite surprised one day. I got a phone call from him. I said, oh, is that Steve Proctor? He's very posh, Bernie. I said, yeah. I said, Bernie Starr here from Kirkland's. And I said, oh, hi, Bernie. You know, what can I do for you? He said, Steve, we've got a little project going on, and I wonder if you'd meet me so we could discuss it. So I went, okay. So they own Rooney's, the pizza place over the road as well. So his big thing was Rooney's, and it comes back to the New Order thing in a minute. Yeah, sure. So he said, meet me at Rooney's, I'll buy you pizza, and we'll have a chat. So I went down, met him, we sat down, had pizza together, and chatting away. And he said, Steve, I hope you don't mind me contacting you. He said, but you know, we've got this project we're developing, and he said, I've asked around, and everybody says you're the best DJ to have on board for our project. And you know, you pull people, you do business, but you're very adventurous, you're very upfront and very different. And you know, and you put in the sort of crowd that we want to attract. And I said, oh, well, I said, that's very flattering. I said, wow, you know, he said, I said, you know, what is the project? He said, well, let me show you. So we got in the car outside Rooney's, and he took me to the state. And he literally went in through the side door, and it was a bit of a building site. But it's like up this alley, and then it's like into this door, and then all of a sudden it's this huge ballroom. And I'm like, okay, wow. And he said, yeah, we've bought this place, and we're going to turn it into a club.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's going to be called the State, because it's the State Ballroom. That's what it was at one point or another. And he said, and this is where it's going to be, and we've got this going on and all the rest of it. He said, and we'd like you to be the resident DJ.
Fantastic.
And I said, well, when? He said, well, we're going to be open Thursday, Friday and Saturday, and we want you to be the resident DJ every night. And I was like, wow. I said, oh, that's pretty mind-blowing. I said, at the moment, that's really not possible, because I'm actually at Cagney's on a Thursday and a Sunday, and I am working other places Friday and Saturday. He said, well, this is not going to happen right away. He said, obviously, we've got work to do, and it transpired. It's a grade 2 listed building. And every single alteration they had to make had to go through English Heritage. So the opening time slipped and slipped and slipped. He said, will you book us a band for the opening night? And I'd booked, I think I'd booked Animal Nightlife for the opening night. And then they couldn't meet they'd had to ask them to defer the date. The contracts had been signed, so they couldn't just cancel the date. So I put Animal Nightlife, played just long after they opened. So basically there was about a year's time between when it was supposed to open. So in the meantime, I was still at Cagney's on a Thursday and a Sunday, but I was really becoming disillusioned. I mean, I was making them a fortune, and they agreed to up my fee up my money to £15 a night.
Double again.
Which, to be honest with you, wasn't too bad at the time. But it, and I was working at the Exec Friday and Saturday, and I was doing okay. And then there was a fire at the Exec, and it closed down. And then I moved to the warehouse for a while, and then that had a fire.
Jeez.
And it was like sort of, okay. And then the State still hadn't opened, but I was getting fed up with being at Cagney's. I wasn't really getting on with the people anymore. So then the State opened. I was invited to the official opening. But by that time, I'd already been approached by Roland Adams from the Adamses, who owned a couple of clubs, basically with a proposition about taking over the Pyramid, which was about to lose its license because it was as dodgy as anything. But basically he said, look, we'll give you full control, all the rest of it. So I said, so I went in there on a Friday and a Saturday. So when the State opened, I had to say to Bernie, because Bernie had said, we're about to open, will you come? And I said, well, I've just made a commitment to this other situation. I said, but I'm prepared to leave Cagney's on a Thursday and a Sunday and come to the State on a Thursday. So we did the deal, and because they couldn't get me full time, they brought in Frank Cookson, who'd been the DJ at Kirkland's at the Baltimore Rooms. That was how he got the Friday and the Saturday. And so I went in. He'd had a little go at the Thursday, but he couldn't make it work. There was literally pitiful, like about 100 people there if they were lucky in a huge, great big place. So I told Cagney's I was leaving, and they freaked out completely. But I didn't want to leave the system because, well, it was still the Pyramid at the time, or Cleopatra's, or whatever it was at the time, because what they were doing there was something I wanted to do, which is basically incorporate what I'd seen Roger do at Eric's, and people do at the warehouse as well, but also with an alternative dance night. And I had the best of everything. So basically, I built the stage in the system, completely, rigged it all out, and did all the promotions there, booked all the bands, DJ'd there, ran everything basically. It was my club in Albert name, as it were. And I really liked that, And to be honest with you, so I went to the State on a Thursday, and the first night so I announced that I was leaving Cagney's. I wasn't allowed to tell people on the last night at Cagney's that I was leaving there. I had to tell people by word of mouth, and the management, the owners were really pissed off with me because within 3 weeks I'd emptied Cagney's.
inspired, yeah.
But on top of that, we were starting to get more and more people. Within a month of me being at the State, we were doing 1,000 people every Thursday night.
Incredible.
And as part of that, I'd said to Bernie, look, you know, he'd said, look, you know, because I'd booked Animal Nightlife for we already had that gig, but I'd said, look, you know, it's got great potential, this place is a live music venue. And I said, but you know, there's a couple of things you need to do. We need to build a stage. He said, can you handle that? I said, yeah. So I designed and had that stage built. They paid for it to their credit because it was part of the venue infrastructure. And I said, look, here's the deal. You know, I'll design the stage. I'll book all the bands. I'll hire the venue from you. There's only two we co-promoted, and that was Chris Rea and Clint Eastwood and General Saint. All the other gigs were my gigs, and the PAs were mine as well. So, and that's how we came to do New Order. Basically, I mean, again, it was a case of I was only booking bands or promoting bands that I made the records big, or who I knew were going to be big to my crowd, who my crowd wanted to see. And New Order fitted that bill completely. So basically, I did what I always do. I tracked down who managed them. I tracked down what the process was, whether it was an agent. And as it happened, it was a guy called Rob Gretton. So I literally rang Rob one day. This is long before answer machines and mobile phones. I rang him up. People were very forthcoming with numbers at those days as well. As long as you had the right name or you had the right situation, you know, as long as you could reassure people that you were bona fide and genuine, you know, then you could do it. So I rang Rob up and I said, look, Rob, I've got this amazing club in Liverpool called the State. I'd been to the Hacienda opening and then the closing, and then the opening and then the closing, because he could never get the sound right in the 80s as well. I said, look, he said, what's it like? I said, it's nothing like the Hacienda. I said, it's a great big old Lions tea rooms. It became a State ballroom, right? It's all got marble freezers around the place. It's a great two-listed building. And he was like, whoa, I've really got to see that. So I said, well, come to Liverpool. And Bernie had said, if you invite him to Liverpool, I said to Bernie, he wants to see the place. He said, we'll take him for a pizza at Rooney's. That was always Bernie's
the selling point.
And Bernie, to his credit, was always hugely supportive of me. So basically, we've run out of time. Okay. So that's right. So how we came to do the New Order thing was basically I rang Rob Gretton. I offered him. I said, I've got this amazing venue. I said, you know, you please bring them. He said, I've got to come and see it. So he came to see it. Bernie paid for us all to have pizzas at Rooney's. Then we took him to the States, and he had a great time. Bernie bought him drinks all night and everything. Put Rob on the train, and I said, okay, where do we go from here? He said, I love the place, want to do the gig. Give me a call tomorrow. So I rang him up the next day. He said, here's what you do. He said, Steve, I'll give you my address. Write me a letter offering us a gig, and I'll write back accepting it. So that's what we did. So basically, I wrote him saying, you know, it was great to meet you, blah, 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 you know, we'd like to offer the gig. And he wrote back, typed it himself, signed it himself with his home address on it. Dear Steve, it was great to meet you as well. Love the State. We want to do the gig. This will be the date. This will be the fee. We'll bring our own support band. You pay them £50. It was James. So basically...
What a gig.
It was a great... Well, I was told by Bernie that we had a capacity of 1,500. So I'd sold 1,400 tickets. And then a week before we were told that we could only have 800 people in there.
Oh,
so I rang Rob and said, I've got a real dilemma. And he said, it's fine, we'll do 2 nights.
Wow.
So he just basically slotted the second night in. So he saved my ass. I paid him the same amount for both nights, but by the same token, he was wonderful to me. And the after story of that is basically so the after story of that is that the letter that he sent to me, I've still got. And I posted.
I think I've seen that. Yeah.
I posted a picture of it.
Fabulous.
And then I was contacted by somebody from Universal Music saying they were doing a box set of with a book of Power, Corruption and Lies.
Yeah.
And they paid for me to go to Manchester with the letter, and they had it professionally photographed. Oh. And I've just had confirmation it's going to be in the book.
Oh, fantastic!
So that's a really lovely thing. So then after that, I did a few more gigs. I did Big Audio Dynamite. I did Zig Zig Sputnik. I did Howard Devoto. I did a few others as well. Divine, which was a great gig. All really successful gigs.
Fantastic history, Steve, isn't it?
But by the middle of '86, just as I was doing the gigs of Big Audio Dynamite and Zig Zig Sputnik, I realised I needed to get out of Liverpool. So So I'd applied for a job at Polydor Records, and in January 97, I got the job. And so in January 1987, I left Liverpool, left the States, and went to London.
Excellent.
And that's the next chapter.
It is, chapter 2.
Chapter
So, Steve Proctor, that was excellent. Many, many thanks. Well, Steve Proctor,
Back again.
part 2. Part 2.
Here we go, back again.
This amazing life story that you have. So I understand that you auditioned for the Tube back in the day.
Yes, that was one of my many varied lifetime experiences. I basically saw an advert in the back of NME or Melody Maker or one of those, the usual sort of, are you trendy? Are you interested in music? Are you, new TV show launching, looking for presenters,
Brilliant.
apply here, sort of thing.
Wow.
So I very quickly, you had to send some pictures and a little bio of yourself. So I very quickly basically got some pictures taken. Gary Lawley, I think, took some pictures for me, which is really kind of him.
He's a great photographer, isn't he, Gary?
Yeah, he's phenomenal photographer.
Photographed all the Liverpool
great.
bands.
He's a great guy. He did a few photo sessions for me, but he took some pictures for me, and I wrote a biography saying what I'd done up to that point, which was pretty extensive at the time, and sent it off. And then didn't think anything more of it. Then all of a sudden, out of the blue, I got a telegram. Believe it or not, a telegram.
That was back in the day,
from the
wasn't
post office. Yeah, I mean, long before all this modern technology. So I got a telegram saying, "Been trying to contact you by phone. Can you give us a call immediately? We're interested in seeing you." So I rang the telephone number and said, "Hi, blah blah blah. It's Steve Proctor. I've been told to call you." And the woman said, "Oh yeah, we've been we're holding regional auditions in Birmingham. I think it was Birmingham. Are you able to make it? We'll pay your expenses." So I said, "Well, yeah, sure, okay, no problem at all." So she gave me all the details, and she said turn up, and it turned out it was an Ed Baston cricket ground. I think that's Birmingham, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
So we turned up there, and it was like there was thousands of people. It seemed to be thousands of people there. A lot of people there. And they basically went around, put us all in groups, and it was like a group session where people were talking or answering questions and things like that. And then we were then sort of amongst ourselves. Then we were put in separate but smaller groups. Then we were broke for lunch, and then some of us were told to stay behind, others were released, and we stayed behind, and we did the same thing again. And one of the questions they asked every time was name a band in your town or city that hasn't been signed that you think will be stars.
Yeah.
And I said from the very beginning, Frank Goes to Hollywood, every time.
Cool.
So that was fine. The end of the day came, and they paid my expenses, paid my train fare, and all the rest of it. And off I went. And they said, "We'll let you know." Then next thing I got a phone call. Or a letter, I think it was. I can't remember, to be honest with you. And unusually for me, I didn't keep the communication. But I got a communication basically saying, we want you to come for a second audition in, I think it was Manchester somewhere. Anyway, there was a second
Well done, yeah.
and it was the same process again, but there was less people. There was only a few hundred people there. And it was the same thing, in groups, chat away, facilitators, and then, whittled out. And by the end of it, there was about 20 of us left. And went to the same thing, name a band in your town that has been silent, Frank Goes to Hollywood, and then talk about music and what have you been doing in music, what do you think about music, how have you got involved with music, etc., etc. And that was it. And then the next thing I got, I can't remember how I got the message again, but I was invited to Tyne-Tees TV in Newcastle.
Wow. Yeah.
And it turned out when I turned up there, they paid all my expenses, we put over in a hotel, etc., etc. And they said it's for a program called The Tube. We've already got Jules Holland, and they'd already announced about that time, Paulie Yates presenting. And I was one of 4 people to get through the whole process. Fantastic. And it was me, Nicolai Klaus from the Dream Academy, Muriel Gray, and somebody else who to this day I have no idea who it was.
Right. Yeah.
And we did the audition. It was a proper audition. I had to do a review to camera of E.T. and I had to do an interview. I had to interview Jules Holland, And then we did a couple of little sort of group things talking. It was filmed, and then I was told, you know, thanks very much, we'll let you know, sort of thing. And then I got a call a few days later from Malcolm Geary, who was the main producer, basically saying, look, we're really sorry, we loved everything you did, but unfortunately you haven't got the gig, you know. It turned out Nicola Clouds had got it. So they launched, and it was Muriel Gray and Nicola Clouds at the gig. And then 2 weeks later he had a hit with Dream Academy with Life in a Northern Town, and he disappeared and they never replaced him. and that's the story of it, but basically, so I mean, that's how close I came. But what was really lovely about it was I stayed in touch with them, and as a result of that, I was managing a band called Numbers 28 that had Tony Griffith from Jojo the Real People. Had him playing in the band and a few other people. So I got them on the tube with a new band special. But one of the other things they did is they contacted me and said, we're interested in this band, Frank Goes to Hollywood, that you've been talking about. You know, we've heard a couple of other things about them. Can we film them? So I facilitated the filming of Frank Goes to Hollywood at the State.
Wow, I remember that.
I coordinated all that, arranged all that, you know, did all the stuff with Bernie and made it all happen basically. And as a result of that, Paul Morley saw them on the tube, and they got the deal with NTT.
Incredible. I
know. I mean, to be honest with you, I'm sure they would have always happened anyway. And I could never lay claim to the fact that they owed all to me at all. But
you played a part, didn't you?
I'm proud that I spoke for them, you know, and I'm proud that my judgment was found to be solid and proper, you know. That
was a revolutionary performance in the State, wasn't it?
Yeah, with the leather pets.
Yeah.
Well, the girls were regulars at my clubs anyway.
Right.
But my connection with Frankie goes back a lot even before that, because when they were Sons of Egypt, there'd been some talk about me singing with them for a little while. And I actually told them they were ridiculous to think that anybody could replace Holly, and they should have Holly back immediately. And it was always, and I offered to manage them, and I felt that Holly always thought that I'd sort of edged him out at one point with Sons of Egypt, which is not the case. In actual fact, I was the one that said, you can never have any other singer but Holly. You know, he's got to be Holly, you know. And you know, Brian Nash met his wife dancing on in a Cagney's.
Right.
I DJ'd their wedding, and I did their 25th anniversary wedding reception, wedding anniversary.
Fantastic,
a couple of years ago. So yeah, so my connection with Frankie, and they were great with me as well. I mean, you know, I always had upfront stuff for them, and you know, again, I was one of the first DJs to play Relax and T-Tribes and you know, all that sort of stuff. And I'm still friends with Nash now.
Fantastic, yeah. I've seen him on your Facebook.
Yeah, still see him now.
Excellent. So in '87, you moved to London. You mentioned at the end of the part one.
Yeah, it was basically it was a case of. I mean, I was doing so much. I mean, the bottom line was the lease had run out on the building that the system was in, so we'd had to close the system. And I'd looked around, and to be honest with you, I'd done as much as I could possibly do in Liverpool. I'd had a little go in London in 1984, and it hadn't worked out because I wasn't ready for it then. But by '86, I knew I was ready, and by coincidence, I happened to hear that there was a job going at Polydor Records.
Okay.
And I knew the guy who was leaving. He was a good friend of mine, Paul Redman. And I owe Paul an awful lot, you know. I'm a great believer in paying credit and being grateful, you know. And Paul, at the time, could have easily said, "Oh, we don't want any jumped up dickhead from Liverpool, you know, mustn't in on the music scene in London." But I rang him up and said, "I understand you're leaving." He said, "Yeah, do you want an interview?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd love one." He said, "I'll sort it out for you."
Oh, fantastic.
And a week later, I got a phone call from HR, Human Resources in Polydor, saying Paul had spoken to them and they'd like to offer me an interview, pay all my expenses to come to London. So I went to London and met a woman called Carol Wilson, who was famous for having set up Din Disc.
Okay,
in the
House Martins, was it?
No, that was Go Disc.
Oh, right, yeah.
Din Disc was OMD and stuff like that.
Right,
it was a subsidiary of Virgin, but she was already well known for having signed the Police to A&M and various other things. She was a legend in the A&R business, basically. She was head of A&R So I had a meeting with her, and we sat talking for about 2 hours, and
Relaxed.
very relaxed, very cool. And at the end of it, well, towards the end, she said, "Have you got a few more minutes? I'd just like you to meet somebody." So I said, "Yeah, of course, no problem." So she picked up the phone, dialed internally. She said, "Hi, Richard." She said, obviously he must have said, "Yeah." I said, "See, I'm with somebody. I'd like you to meet them. I'd like to introduce you to them." And he said, "Okay." So she took me down a spiral staircase in great upper Brook Street, where they were. Went down. There was a guy in a massive office. Obviously, he said, "Richard, this is Richard Griffiths. He's the MD of Polydor Records." And she said, "Richard, I'd like you to meet our new A&R man." And that was it.
That was the job.
That was the job. That was the job.
Yeah.
It was literally, I talked myself into the job.
Fabulous.
In that time, and it was like, I was like, and she said, "Are you not our new A&R man?" I said, "Yeah, yes, I am." So my
track record proves it, doesn't it?
Well, yeah.
Spotting talent and.
Well, my role was to create a new dance music club label,
Okay.
and I came up with the idea of Urban.
Of what? Sorry.
Urban.
Okay.
Which is a famous label now for having basically the rare groove scene, the funk rare groove scene was happening in London big time, and I benefited from the input from a few people in London, but also I was in clubs 7 days a week, researching, and Polydor or Polygram in America happened to own a lot of the quality stuff. So I released Mason and Max Cross the Tracks, Jackson Sisters, I Believe in Miracles, Bobby Bird, I Know You Got Soul. I compiled Urban Classics Volume 1 and 2, and these are all records and pieces of vinyl that basically are famous now. I mean, they're legendary now. Yeah, so I had a massive input very, very quickly.
What I've picked up from this, and I think a lesson to any young people, is the benefit of developing tentacles everywhere, going after opportunities, building relationships, ear to the ground, looking for the next thing, moving on, building your experience, building your CV. Absolutely typify the benefit of that. Well,
and it goes back to what I was saying earlier on about the fact that it's like, I don't regard myself as ever being, an originator. I like to say, I'm an early adopter or one of the originals, but I can't claim to have invented anything or created anything. But I'm certainly proud of the fact that I was there at the very beginning of punk, the new romantic futurist thing. I was right at the top of the rare groove thing in London when it happened. And of course that led me on to managing Derek B, the British rapper, very much involved with the early hip hop scene in Britain. And then of course moved on to be recognised as, hopefully recognised as one of the DJs, one of the pioneers, one of the originals from the Balearic acid house scene that came out of Ibiza and Chicago.
How did that all come about? Because that's what your legendary status is, isn't it?
Well, it's one of those. The weird thing is that being at the State on a Thursday night, I was doing 1,000 people every Thursday night, playing really alternative across the board stuff. Because in a place like Liverpool, especially in a place like the State, you've got to play across the board. But I had a reputation for playing really different across the board. And it turns out that was a style that was really popular in Ibiza. And there was a guy called Sid, who in Liverpool was known as Ibiza Sid, but in Ibiza was known as Scouse Sid. And basically one night in 1985, in October, Pete Wiley said to me at the end of the night at the State, "I'd like you to meet a friend of mine, a guy called Sid." And Sid's like really effusive, really. "All right, Steve, yeah, great to meet you." He said, "I've been here all night, really lovely." He said, "I manage a club in Ibiza called Amnesia."
All right, yeah.
And I went, "Oh yeah." He said, "What you're playing is perfect for us in Amnesia. Would you come up and work there?" And I said, "Well, for how long? I mean, how long?" He said, "It's just a season. It's 3 months, maybe, sometime a couple of weeks either side." And I said, "Well, to be honest with you," I said, "I worked really hard to build a situation here where I'm the biggest independent promoter probably in the Northwest, definitely Merseyside." I said, "And I'm probably one of the biggest DJs in the country, with the biggest followings in the country, playing all year round." I said, "If I came to Ibiza for 3 months, I'd lose everything I've worked hard for here."
Yeah.
I said, "If you want to offer me full time," he said, "We can't because the club shuts. It's a seasonal thing." And I said, "Well, thanks, Sid, but I'm not interested. Thanks very much." So he said, "Take my number anyway. I've still got his number. Use my details. If you ever change your mind, give us a shout." So I was already, and what makes me laugh is Peter Hooton tells me a story about when from the farm, yeah. When the Balearic thing was happening, they used to take the piss out of Terry Farley, saying, "Oh, Proctor was Balearic before you even knew what Balearic was," because I used to come to the States and all the rest of the system. So basically, I remember driving Paul Oakenfold to Liverpool from Prestatyn for the Soul Weekender, and he said, "I've just been to Ibiza. Me, Johnny Walker, Danny Rampling, and Nicky Holloway just been to Ibiza. Oh, we heard this guy called Alfredo DJ in a place called Amnesia." And I said, this was in the September of '87. And I said, anyway, sometime in '87. So I think I just left Polydor, maybe, I can't remember. But he said, we started seeing this guy. I said, Amnesia. I said, I got offered the residency there in '85. And he went, "Oh, really?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "But he was playing all this alternative music and different types of music." He said, "I loved it." He said, "I want to open a club like that in London." And I said, "Well, that's brave." I said, "It's nothing like we haven't been doing across the provinces for years." I said, "But if you open a club like that in London, I'll come and support you because it's brilliant." Wow. So he opened Future, and Nancy Noyes was one of the DJs there, who was a phenomenal DJ and was one of the originals from Ibiza anyway. But the music he was playing, which he'd heard Alfredo play, was pretty much a lot of what I'd been playing in Liverpool, and that I'd stopped playing because I'd moved to London and was doing a rare groove thing. But of course, he was incorporating early house music as well. So he'd be playing like a Belgian new beat track like Split Second, then he'd be playing the Wooden Tops YYY, and then he played Thrashing Dove, Sympathy for the Devil, or G's on the Payroll. And I had all those records. So I started getting known as somebody who could play all the records that Oakenfold was playing. There was that Balearic acid house thing, if he wasn't available. So then I started doing more and more gigs. Then I got, then I did a tape for him and for Danny Rampling for Shum once. And Paul, I'd known Paul since he was a junior at Rush Release Club Promotions. He wouldn't have it. He said, "I've got Nancy, I don't need another DJ." And I got a phone call from Danny Rampling one day saying, "We've heard your tape, we love it, and we'd love you to come and start DJing at Shum." So I started DJing at Shum, and then I started DJing at Love of the Wag. I was a residency there. And I headlined the first 3 Sunrise raves, and just very quickly developed a reputation for being somebody who had all the music, but also would bring his own style and influence to it as well.
Yeah, that seems to be a theme of your life, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much so. Yeah.
Pioneer and someone who does differently.
From
the rest. Which is important,
basically taking the idea and then put my own slant on it, basically.
You not only spun the records, you broke bands and records, but you fed the scene by making your own records. What's that all about?
I mean, because I'd managed Derek B, I'd learned how to use a studio. I came to remixing and producing relatively late, considering, I was in the studio with him in '87, but I didn't go into the studio on my own of my own accord till 1988. And I made what's become known as one of the very first ever British and European acid house records, which is Technodelia by Technodelia.
Right, okay.
I sampled a couple of things on it, but I put a 303 all the way through it, and it was licensed across Europe, Belgium, Italy, everywhere, which is a real boost, And then I did a track called Precinct 13, Listen to Your Heartbeat, which Together stole for Hardcore Uproar. I've got the evidence to prove that I did mine first. I manufactured 1,000 to look like an Italian import, with an Italian stamp, import stamp on it, everything like that. And they bought one in Manchester as an Italian import, they thought, and went and copied it, which is what the Italians used to do, the English stuff.
Right.
So I did that, and then I started getting asked to do remixes. So I was one of the very first sort of DJ remixer producers. And I ended up remixing Mock Turtles, Can You Dig It, and Hippie Chick by Soho, and China Crisis, African and White, Pete Wiley, and loads of stuff.
Fantastic, yeah. The African and White record then, so how do you actually physically do that?
That was a really hard one, because basically because I knew the record inside out from when I first played it in 1981 or whenever it came out, and I knew there was at least 3 different multi-tracks and master track tapes of it. So I got the original 16-track recording, and I got the 24-track recording from London, and I put them on a 32-track digital tape. and I had to slow it all down to the right speed and keep it all in the right key. And then I brought a female backing singer called Claudia Fontaine, who's the best in the business.
Yeah.
And we wrote the parts for her, all the backing vocals together. And then I wrote brand new bass line, brand new keyboard parts, brand new flute parts, percussion parts, and all the rest of it. And then I put it all together myself.
Oh, fantastic. What studio in London was it?
Orinoco, yeah.
Right.
They used to manage me. But there's an intro to that China Crisis record that actually I did as an outro. I wrote a reprise because it was taking me back to my original record buying and collecting, where quite often on an album you'd see a reprise, which would basically be the main theme of the main track, but just a little take on it. And so the reprise was all the intro. I don't know if you've ever heard. Have you heard the track?
I have heard it.
Right.
Yeah, we're looking forward to playing it on this film.
That whole intro was actually a reprise. Basically, I'd done all the mixes. I'd done 2 mixes of it. I'd done all the work on it. And as we were about to strip everything back down, shut all the machines off, and all the rest of it, I said, "Run it one more time. I want to do something." And I played the desk, letting them bring things in, all the percussion and the pads and everything. And I just mixed it in one go. So it was the whole length of the original track, which was 3.5 minutes, I think, or 3 minutes.
Yeah.
So I sent the tapes off with all the mixes on it, but with that as a reprise. And the record company guy came back and said, "We love it, we want the reprise to be the intro." So it was the very early days of digital editing. So we managed to find a digital editing place that specialised in editing classical music. So it was very, very fine increments, but very good quality. And it took me 5 hours to be able to find a way to blend that intro onto the intro to make it feel like it was a natural
Seamless.
thing.
Yeah. And the band like what you've done.
Yeah. My understanding is they liked it very, very much. I've had a few negative comments from somebody just recently about it, but nothing to do with the band. Somebody who's connected with the band. That's fine. People are entitled to their opinion. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
But my understanding.
Helps.
What's quite interesting is that I got such a. The first time I played it in Ibiza to a sunset, another Balearic DJ, who's a very well-known DJ, came up and said, "Oh, bloody hell, Steve," he said, "I didn't even realise that was you. It's fantastic." Even now I get messages from Balearic DJs around the world saying, "Didn't realise that was you, just played it, it's fucking brilliant, we love it," and it's like... So
still going down well, almost 40 years later.
It's got a beautiful feel to it,
Mm.
and it's got a beautiful sentiment to it, And all I tried to do was bring out the best and the beauty of it, whilst adding to it without overwhelming it, or as it were. I've always
balance, isn't it?
Well, that's for me. It's been the art. That's the art for me, is bringing myself to it without pushing them away. I mean, some mixes I do, they're all me, but they're inspired by the original creativity.
Yeah.
So I'll always.
You love the record. Is it key that you love the record, or is it just a job?
I have to be inspired by the record. Yeah. That's why I turned down Prince's Wife at one point because the track was shite, absolute shite. I turned down The Shaman because it wasn't a very good track.
Yeah.
I've turned down a lot of my time.
These are not good then.
I never got off of that track. And some of the mixes of that are fantastic. Eddie Richards done a wicked mix of it. But my point is that basically, I would never do a mix just for the money.
Yeah.
I've never been about the money.
Got to be out of passion, isn't it? You end up with a better product.
Well, I always had the thing that everything I did in my life, I had to be proud of. Whenever I talked about it, whenever I reviewed it,
I think it's for me. I see what you do is about a legacy. You're going to leave a legacy, aren't you?
Well, I hope so. And it's a legacy that I can be proud of.
Yeah.
It's not something I look back on.
Proud of.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's not something I have to look back on and go, "Oh, I'm ashamed of doing that." I mean, I did the Anfield rap, but I did that out of passion because I love what I see.
Who's that? Six.
Well, they brought Derek B in. I mean, Craig Johnson had the idea to do Derek B. Yeah. So it was Craig Johnson that contacted me. It's mad. It's mad. My wife said at the time, "Oh, there's a guy rang for you. A guy called Craig Johnson from Liverpool Football Club." It's like,
some Aussie.
You gotta be kidding me, man. So I rang him back and he said, "Yeah, well, it's an idea for the FA Cup." So,
okay then.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was great. It was fantastic.
Brilliant. So we're going to be wrapping up shortly. Okay. Do you still do remixing today? Is that something that you get involved in?
I took time out because obviously I've got 2 kids. My son is autistic, so I took a lot of time out to be with him. And my daughter lives with me now, and So my focus is my kids still, it always will be.
Yeah.
So I took some time out, and because of some of the stuff that's happened in my life, I had to, take it backwards step for a little bit. But yeah, I'm
But
back
it's still
doing it.
there. Still up for it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just about to remix the two from my first two records that I mentioned before.
Yeah.
They both come up to the 13th anniversary. I've got some new tracks that are ready to go, and yeah, just slowly but surely getting back into things.
Excellent.
Like everything I've ever done, I've never forced anything. I can't buy my way into something or push my way into something. Everything I've ever done has happened organically and naturally as a result of my passion and my ability to make that situation happen at the time.
Yeah, it's great. You're going to leave a fantastic legacy. You're going to inspire people with your fight against the trolls and the keyboard warriors and that fight that's ongoing, but you're winning. And keep on doing what you're doing, Steve. An inspiration to many.
Thank you very much, man. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to talk to you about it all, but most importantly, it's wonderful to have the opportunity to hopefully to offer encouragement, support for other people, and to share my passion with other people as well. So thank you very much.
Great to meet you.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, Steve. Thank you.